Chapter 12. Sharon entered the scene while holding Simon's hand. Subsequently, she saw Howard's mother, Fiona, and Sally. Under Sally's gaze, which was full of astonishment, she curled her lips and quietly grasped Simon's arm even tighter. Sally's voice was slightly shaky as she said, "Sharon." They had not seen each other for 5 years. The current Sharon was no longer the same as the previous one. She looked the same, but she now gave out a sense of confidence and pride. Sally could clearly see the provocation in her eyes. She was holding on to Simon and presenting herself as the victor. Sally was agitated. Fiona saw Sharon, the cunning lady who had betrayed her son 5 years ago, as well. "Howard, why is she here?" She looked at her son with a stern gaze. Sharon smiled and answered before Howard could speak. "Auntie, I'm here today to congratulate Howard and Sally." Sally clenched her fists and glared at Sharon without saying a word. Fiona could no longer tolerate it. She immediately waved her hand to summon the security guards to chase her out. However, Howard stopped her and gave her an eye signal. "Mom, Grandpa is still here." Douglas frowned when he saw their suspicious looks. "Why is it that you guys know each other?" He was the only one who had just met Sharon on that day. He could not help but glance at Simon once again. "Could it be that I'm the only one who wasn't aware this lady has been with my son for a long time?" Fiona clenched her teeth. She glared at Sharon and swallowed the disgruntled emotions she had within her. Why does she still have the face to return here? Sally finally recovered, and she let out a fake smile toward Sharon. "Since when did you get to know our uncle?" Simon was the person with the most authority in the Zachary family. Things could take a turn for the worst if Sharon gets close to Simon. How could Sharon not have known Sally's thoughts? She replied with a smile. "We just got to know each other." "Oh right, he's currently my superior, and I'm his partner for tonight." Sally was shocked. "Superior? Partner?" "I'm afraid Sharon is trying to use Simon to enter the party and create havoc." "Howard, I'm feeling slightly unwell. Could you please bring me in to get some rest?" Sally felt rather flustered and needed some peace. "Where are you not feeling well?" Howard quickly went to support her anxiously. "I think I'm just too bored." Sally dived into his arms. On the other hand, she glanced coldly at Sharon, who was in her peripheral vision. "Quickly bring her in to get some rest then, Howard." Fiona was more anxious than Howard. After all, Sally was currently pregnant with her grandchild. Sharon watched coldly as the both of them left the scene. Sally was intentionally trying to make Sharon realize how much Howard cared for her at the moment. "She thinks she can defeat me with just that. If that's so, she's wrong. My feeling for Howard died 5 years ago." Then, Fiona accompanied Douglas to his VIP seat and sneakily ordered someone to keep an eye on Sharon. Sharon noticed that there were quite a few people dancing on the fancy dance floor. She looked at the quiet man beside her and took the initiative to invite him. "President Zachary, may I have the honor to invite you for a dance?" Since she had shown up, she had to do something to remind both Howard and Sally not to forget about her existence. Simon became interested and looked at the lady's pretty little face. His black eyes glistened, and he held her wrist with his big palm. Then he led her to the dance floor. The very next second, Sharon was standing in the middle of the dance floor as the man held onto her waist. "Can you dance?" The tall man looked at her. She felt her ears beginning to warm. Of course. Her emotions were being influenced by him. "Then let's get started." After the man had finished talking, he led her to the dance floor. Subsequently, they started dancing. Sharon was not ready. Thus, she was initially rather passive. However, she very quickly adjusted herself to his footsteps and caught up. Following the rhythm of the music as a guide, the two of them performed a romantic waltz. Soon, everyone surrounding them stopped, and only the two of them were left on the dance floor. Subconsciously, everyone around the dance floor began to watch the two of them as they danced. A lady began gossiping softly. "Who is that young lady who's dancing with President Zachary? Why have I never seen her before? They're dancing very well." Sally, who was being supported by Howard, had just returned to the hall when she saw the two people on the dance floor. Their handsome and pretty looks, as well as their synergy, made those who were watching shower them with praise. Sally stared at Sharon hatefully. It was her party, and she was supposed to be the main character for the night. However, Sharon had seized the spotlight from her. "Howard, just look how shameless she is. She's seducing your uncle. Howard also saw the two people on the dance floor, and his eyes began to swirl with anger. She still doesn't have that kind of ability. However, the dance moves of the two people on the dance floor looked flirtatious. Their bodies were almost glued to each other. Howard, go chase her away, all right? Sally could not bear to look at Sharon. Howard had not acted rashly earlier because of his grandfather's presence. At the moment, he was of the same feeling that Sharon should not stay at the scene. Rest assured, I'll make her disappear immediately, Howard said hatefully as he stared at Sharon, who was enjoying the dance. Chapter 13. Earlier, Sharon had merely asked Simon for a dance casually. She had not expected him to actually agree to it. Who knew that she, who had taken the initiative to invite him, would turn out to be on the passive side? She was being led by Simon's footsteps on the dance floor. Without her realizing it, the man before her was all that she saw in her eyes. Under the sparkling crystal lights, the man's meticulous facial features made him look even more handsome. It was as if his deep eyes had magical powers that were making her attracted to him. Accompanied by the last musical note, they completed their last step. His arms surrounded her, and she ended up being in his embrace. She raised her head and looked into his eyes. At that split second, they made her forget everything. Only when Sharon heard the applause from nearby did she snap out of it. Subconsciously, she got out of his embrace. She lowered her head. I'm going to get a drink. She left the dance floor rather hastily. Simon looked at the woman who seemed to be running away, and his thin lips curled upward. Is that lady being shy? Finally, Sharon came to the spot where the drinks had been placed. However, just when she was about to let out a breath of relief, someone grabbed her hand. The next second, she was yanked forcefully away by that person. Howard, what are you doing? Sharon was astonished by his sudden appearance. What is he planning to do to me with his aggressive stance? Howard did not let out his voice. He grabbed her wrist and dragged her out of the ballroom. At last, they came to a corridor outside. Sharon used every bit of strength she had left to free herself from him. She said angrily, "Where are you bringing me to?" Howard turned around and glared coldly at her. He roared, "Sharon, get lost immediately. Don't think of ruining mine and Sally's banquet." Sharon smiled faintly when she saw how infuriated he was. What's wrong? Are you scared? She looked at him with a cold gaze. 5 years ago, on the same day, she became the most helpless person. He married Sally while she had to suffer. She was doubtful of the fact that Howard had ever loved her. How could he be so cruel to me? Howard raised his brows and snorted. Scared? Me? Oh right. I'm scared to let everyone know that you're my ex-girlfriend. You'll make me lose face. Even though she no longer loved him, hearing the statement still made her sad. She sneered and said purposely, "Yeah, other men wouldn't tell others they know that they were betrayed." Howard recalled the pictures during their marriage. His eyes began to burn with rage. He suddenly got closer to her and grabbed her shoulders. Sharon, you're doing this on purpose, right? Sharon felt pain, because he was putting force on both her shoulders. Nevertheless, she bore with it, and even lifted her chin to face him. She let out a cold smile. If you want to take it that way, so be it. After all, Simon is way more charismatic and handsome than you. Most importantly, he's the head of the Zachary family while you're nothing. You. Howard was so mad at her that his face was apoplectic with rage. He lifted his hand and attempted to slap her. Nevertheless, Sharon quickly caught hold of his wrist and looked at him coldly. She sneered. Are you thinking of hitting me again? Howard Zachary, you have to get this in your head. I'm no longer the Sharon from 5 years ago who was head over heels for you. She shoved his hand away after saying that. Howard's pupils shrunk and let out a smile, even though he was exasperated. Head over heels? Ha, what a joke. Sharon, you betrayed me 5 years ago. If not, how did you give birth to a dirty bastard kid? He still remembered seeing that little boy in the hospital. Her son is already so big. It's so obvious that she betrayed me. Sharon's expression became livid. What did you say? I dare you to try saying it again. Did I say anything wrong? Weren't you the one who seduced another man and gave birth to a dirty bastard kid? Pa. Howard had just finished speaking when he was hit by Sharon's tight slap. Sharon was disgruntled as she stared at him. You can scold me, but you can't scold my son. Her body trembled slightly. Nobody knew how much suffering she had had to endure throughout the past few years. She had to bring up her son all by herself. And it was all because of him and Sally. How could she tolerate Howard humiliating her son in such a manner? Sharon's slap made Howard dumbfounded, and he glared at her with an exasperated expression. He found it hard to believe. Sharon did not wish to argue with him. Thus, she spun around and began to take big strides as she made her way back. Howard voiced out, "Don't you dare set foot into the ballroom." Sharon's footsteps came to a halt. She composed herself, turned around and revealed a smile. "I'm your uncle's partner. If I'm missing, he'll begin to worry." After saying that, she did not look at Howard again. Instead, she continued to walk straight ahead without a single worry. Sally had witnessed the entire incident from a corner. She clenched her fist, as she had not expected the current Sharon to be so unscrupulous. She's thinking of making Simon her support? Dream on. Sharon returned to the ballroom, but Simon was nowhere to be seen. She searched for him high and low, but failed to find him. Maybe something came up and he has to leave for the time being? She took a glass of fruit juice and drank it as she was really thirsty. All of a sudden, Sally went up the stage. Then, with the microphone, she addressed the people present. "Everyone, I'm very happy to see that you've shown up to show us your support. I would like to play a game, but I need everyone's cooperation." Sally scanned through the crowd and finally placed her gaze on Sharon. A cold smile was seen in her eyes. "This lady, would you please come up the stage?" At that split second, everyone turned to look at Sharon. Sharon was startled and looked at Sally up the stage. She clearly sensed that the latter was bearing ill intention. "I'll just have to block every attack with all I've got. Let's see what's Sally up to." With everyone staring at Sharon, she walked up the stage with her head held high. Simon, who went out to answer a call, just came back and coincidentally saw Sharon walking up the stage. His footsteps came to a halt and did not continue walking into the scene. Chapter 14. Sharon stood opposite of Sally. Everyone, including Howard, was now looking at both of them. It has to be said that Howard was standing not too far from them. He frowned and wondered what Sally was up to. It seemed as if Sally was vaguely smiling while looking at Sharon. She said, "Could you please answer my question first? If you answer it wrongly, you'll receive a penalty. Spit it out." Sharon looked right into her eyes. This Sally is still so fake. She has no guts to admit that we both know each other in public. Sally's eyes gleamed coldly. "May I ask what you were talking about with my husband in the corridor outside just now?" Sharon's pretty brows furrowed slightly as she knew what Sally was plotting. "For that question, you should go ask Howard. He's the one who dragged me outside. I've already asked him, and he said you tried to court him. Is that so?" Sally roared coldly, deeming that she was guilty. A commotion broke out amongst the crowd down the stage as people started whispering. Sharon's eyes sparkled subtly. Not giving her any chance to speak, Sally pointed at her again and said to everyone, "Everyone, that lady's name is Sharon Jeans. She's the lady who betrayed Howard 5 years ago during their wedding." Everyone was flabbergasted when they heard it, and they started pointing fingers at Sharon. Sharon's expression changed slightly. It seemed like Sally was trying to expose her identity by flipping through old grudges and making her look bad in front of everyone again. "Howard is my husband now, and you still haven't changed at all. You even tried to seduce him," Sally roared once again. Now, everyone had begun cursing Sharon. They felt sympathetic toward Sally. Sharon even heard someone asking her to get lost. She clenched her fists. "Well, Sally, what a ruthless card you've played. I didn't seduce him. Ask him to step on the stage and clarify it in front of everyone." Sharon wanted to see whether Howard would also be unable to differentiate between the truth and the lie. Sally smiled coldly. "You no longer had the opportunity for that. Like what I said earlier, you'll be punished if you answer it wrongly." As soon as she was done talking, Sally took a glass of wine and ruthlessly poured it on her face. Sharon was not able to dodge it in time. Thus, she closed her eyes subconsciously, and the icy cold liquid flowed down from her hair. The guests at the scene were dumbfounded as they looked at them. They even forgot to make any form of sound. Simon, who was standing at a corner, had his eyes looking dark. He looked straight at Sharon, who looked so embarrassing. Is this her motive for coming here? He did not move an inch. He was looking forward to seeing how she would counter the situation. Sharon's body trembled slightly, as if she had traveled back to that wedding 5 years ago. Back then, Sally had also humiliated her in public in the same way. At that moment, all the rage within her rushed up to her head. She opened her eyes that were now burning with anger. Sally was startled to see Sharon in such a state, and was surprised. Sharon made her way, step by step, toward her. When Sally snapped out, Sharon was already before her. Sharon leaned beside her ears and whispered, "I heard that you're pregnant, but I know the child in your womb doesn't belong to Howard." Sally's pupils suddenly widened before they shrunk. She felt as if the high wall within her had suddenly collapsed. It was as if somebody had suddenly found out the secret she had tried so hard to hide. A jolt of shock coursed through her, and she lost control of her emotions. Consequently, she pushed Sharon away. "Get lost!" she roared anxiously. Sharon was caught off guard after having been pushed away so forcefully by Sally. Her whole body was thrown backward, and she knocked the cake that was a few layers tall aside. In other words, she toppled the cake while falling to the ground embarrassingly. Her face and gown ended up being stained with lots of butter. The crowd shouted when they saw the scene, and backed off to the sides. On the other hand, Sally lost control and began shrieking nervously. "Someone quick, get that B*TCH out of here." It was obvious that Sharon's statement had triggered her. Howard could no longer continue watching at the corner. He glanced at Sharon coldly, though the latter was on the floor. Then, he took big strides and went up the stage to protect Sally. Subsequently, the security guards were summoned. However, just when they were to capture Sharon, a cold and clear voice of a man was heard. "Hold it right there." The crowd turned to see a towering man with strong aura that appeared. He strode over step by step, and everyone gave way to him subconsciously. The security guards dared not take any rash action when they saw him. Each of them was scared out of their wits. In no time, the man's long and straight legs appeared before Sharon. Sharon raised her head, and saw the man's cool yet stern face. Sharon did not know why, but she felt a sense of grievance when she saw Simon. She revealed a smile that looked slightly better than her crying expression to Simon. "President Zachary, I'm sorry for embarrassing you." Simon looked at her from above. He did not answer her. His cold and sharp eyes merely looked at Sally, who was on the stage. Simon said calmly, "She's someone I brought over. Aren't you supposed to ask me for permission before laying a finger on her?" His tone was indifferent, but the cold vibe that was being emanated from his body was more than enough to send chills down one's spine. As the saying went, one should always seek permission from a dog's owner before smacking it. Sharon was Simon's partner. Was Sally not giving Simon any face by humiliating Sharon in public? Sally began to tremble with fear as Simon continued to stare at her with his cold gaze. Only then did she realize that she had misbehaved. "Uncle." She seemed to want to say something. Simon cut her short. "Don't call me uncle. I have no right for that title." Sally's face turned pale, and she dared not say another word. Howard quickly defended her. "Uncle, Sally didn't do it on purpose." Simon's cold gaze glanced over them. He tightened his lips and said nothing. Instead, he leaned over and picked up Sharon. Then, he left the scene while carrying her. Chapter 15. Sharon was carried out of the hotel by Simon. It was at night, and a cold breeze blew over. Consequently, Sharon shivered as she felt rather cold. The wine from Sally had drenched the cloth around her chest. Her hair was all wet as well, and her shirt was stained with butter. Seeing herself in such a state, she felt embarrassed. "Thank you, please put me down," she said softly. At that moment, a car arrived before them and came to a halt. Simon let go of her. She saw that his western suit was now stained with quite a lot of butter, and she felt sorry for it. "Sorry, I dirtied your clothes again. Perhaps you could take your clothes off and let me wash it for you." Simon remained silent and merely looked at her. Initially, he was curious about why she had insisted on him being his partner to enter the hotel. He had thought she was intentionally there to cause havoc. Without a doubt, from the looks of it, it seemed as if she had indeed planned to destroy the banquet. However, she ended up getting herself into a mess as well. The man did not let out a single sound, and instead kept staring at her. His gaze made her feel frightened. She let out a dry smile and said, "I know I look very disgusting right now, but you don't have to look at me like that, right?" Ah! As soon as she said that, the man stretched out his hand, and pinned her in front of the car. His towering silhouette slowly began to approach her, as he engulfed her within his arms. I don't care what sort of grudge you have with my nephew. I don't wish to be caught up in your mess. His warning was understood by Sharon clearly. That night, she had used him to enter the banquet. He could forget about that, but if she was plotting to use him to get her revenge on Howard, she had miscalculated things. The cold vibe that was being emanated from the man's body made her tremble. So it seems like he helped me out earlier, just so that he could protect his dignity. She smirked and let out a smile. It is no wonder he was mad. Sharon lowered her gaze and retrieved the emotions that were dwelling within her eyes. She said softly, "Rest assured, President Zachary, such a thing will only happen once. There won't be another time." She had never thought of using him to seek revenge on Howard. It was her own issue after all. Simon glanced at Sharon's face that was stained with butter and suddenly found it hilarious. Those who had no idea what had happened would have thought she had just attended a birthday party. His stony expression gradually loosened. He released his hand, opened the car door, and said in a deep voice, "Get in the car." Sharon looked at him puzzled. He blurted with an indifferent face, "I'm giving you a ride home." "Well, I shouldn't trouble you." Before she could finish talking, the man immediately pressed her into the car. Then, he entered the car and ordered the driver to ignite the engine. Sharon was genuinely afraid that she would soil the car. She dared not simply move once she took a seat in the car. Well, what about Director Zachary? She remembered that Simon had come with Douglas. There will be another car to take him home. Sharon looked at him. Oh right, affluent families like them don't have only one car. The car came to a halt at the condominium where Sharon was staying. Throughout the journey, the two did not exchange a single word. Sharon tilted her head and looked at the man who had closed his eyes to get some rest. "President Zachary, I've reached my place. Thanks for the ride home." The man answered. Nevertheless, he did not open his eyes. Such an atmosphere would make anyone feel uneasy. Thus, Sharon quickly pushed the car door open and got down from the car. As soon as she got down from the car, the man in the vehicle said, "Wait." Then, she immediately caught hold of whatever was thrown out from within the car. It was his western outer coat. "Didn't you say that you'd wash it for me?" He raised his brows and looked at her from within the car. "Ah, yes, I'll wash," she quickly replied. She viewed him as an indifferent person and had thought that he would ditch that coat. He would immediately discard it and not even let her wash it. "Wash it yourself," the man added. "Of course I'll wash it till it's clean." She was guessing Simon perhaps thought she would send it to the laundromat. Subsequently, the car in front of her drove away. Sharon lowered her head and looked at the coat in her hand before sighing. She had a headache. She had rented the gown she was wearing, and at the moment, it was so dirty that one could not bear looking at it. By the time Sharon returned to her room, it was pretty late. Fortunately, she had given Riley a call saying that she would be working overtime and had to trouble her to look after her son, the little kid, and Riley had already hit the sack. It's for the best since they won't see me in this state. Sharon quickly got herself cleaned up and returned to the room that belonged to her and her son. The little kid was hugging a dinosaur doll and sleeping soundly. She touched his head gently and looked at his sleepy face that made her smile subconsciously. Not wanting to wake him up, she sneaked her way to the other side of the room and laid down. At the moment she did not feel sleepy. Recalling what had happened at the hotel and the shocking look on Sally's face, it looked like she had guessed it right. Sally is not pregnant with Howard's child. There was a chance the baby had something to do with the male doctor she had seen back in the hospital. She had to look for the man and thoroughly investigate the truth behind those intimate pictures taken back in that year. Simon returned to the Zachary household after sending Sharon back home. The moment he entered the doorway, he saw his father, sister-in-law, Howard and Howard's wife in the hall. It seemed as if they had been waiting for him. Chapter 16. Despite being faced with such a grand scene, Simon's expression remained unchanged. He took his sweet time and strode forward. "I'm home, Dad," Simon greeted Douglas, who was sitting at the main seat. Subsequently, he turned to look at the people beside him. "You're here as well, sister-in-law?" Fiona was his sister-in-law. 5 years ago, his elder brother passed away in a car accident. Consequently, He had to return to take over the Zachary family. After the accident concerning Simon's elder brother, Fiona and Howard moved out. They had done so as they did not want to stay in the house to keep seeing items that jogged their memory about Simon's elder brother. Douglas looked at him with a stern expression. He asked in an unhappy tone, "Where have you been? Why have you only reached home now?" Simon raised his long brows as he found it rather hilarious. "Dad, I'm already a grown-up. I don't see what's the problem with me coming back home slightly late." In truth, he was well aware that his father was questioning him about his whereabouts, so that he could find out if he had been together with Sharon. Douglas snorted loudly. "Where's that lady named Sharon? She destroyed the banquet, but she didn't bear its consequences. And you took her away." Fiona, who was just beside Douglas, had wanted to question Simon long ago. Since Douglas had brought up the matter, she could not hold herself back. She said, "Simon, Sharon is not a good lady. 5 years ago, she did something and betrayed Howard. Now her return spells nothing but trouble. You should stay away from that lady." "Yeah, Sharon is a lady who isn't as simple as you might think. In the past, I was foolish enough to be her best friend. I wasn't able to see through her true colors. I only realized later on that she had hooked up with another man, even though she already had a boyfriend. Without Howard's knowledge, she went to other men and seduced them. I pitied Howard back then." Sally put on a sorrowful look as she added on to Fiona's statement. She hated Sharon immensely as her wedding anniversary had been trashed. Not to mention, Sharon had made her lose her composure in public. Consequently, everyone's impression of her as an elegant lady had now disappeared into thin air. She could not wait to see Sharon vanish immediately. What made her terrified was the comment that Sharon had whispered in her ear. As Sharon found out something, subconsciously, she raised her hand and touched her stomach as her body trembled slightly. Howard did not say a word. He noticed that she was trembling, and thus thought she was shaking out of infuriation. Feeling heartbroken, he hugged Sally and gently held her back as he comforted her. After hearing their ruthless comment about Sharon, Simon said indifferently, "What does the sort of person she is have anything to do with me? She was my partner tonight, and she was being bullied. Evidently, I had to stand on her side. Didn't you hear them say that she's a playgirl? Do you think any good will happen with such a lady getting close to you?" Douglas believed in what Fiona had said, and was determined not to allow his son to get near such a woman. "What evidence do you guys have to prove that she's a playgirl?" "Just a few statements, and you guys convict her of being guilty." Simon replied calmly, "There is evidence. There are photos to prove it." Sally suddenly said out of anxiety, "Oh, where are the photos then?" Simon asked. Sally's expression turned dark, as those photos had been lost long ago. 5 years ago, Howard had tried to look for the photos after the wedding had ended. However, the projector broke down, and the USB flash drive was destroyed along with the photos. Worst of all, he failed to pinpoint the culprit that had projected them. Too many people had attended the wedding at that time. Thus no one noticed that thing. The photos, the only evidence of Sharon's betrayal, were gone. Simon noticed that they were unable to hand him the proof. Therefore he said, "If there's nothing else, I'll be heading back to my room." "Stop right there." Douglas suddenly barked in a deep voice. Simon turned around. "Is there anything else?" "Fire Sharon tomorrow," Douglas ordered. Simon frowned. "Dad, she did nothing wrong. What will the other workers think if I fire her out of the blue? Such an unfair thing will never take place in Central Corporation." Simon paused for a moment before adding, "If that's the matter, save your breath. You should get more rest, Dad." Simon spun around after speaking and headed upstairs without any hesitation. He simply ignored the awful expression on his father's face. "You one hell of a spoiled brat. Are you trying to make me angry?" Douglas roared. Fiona quickly got up and comforted him. "Calm down, Dad. It's all Sharon's fault. How long has it been since Simon met her? And yet, she has already convinced Simon to take the wrong path. I did mention earlier that Sharon is wicked. Otherwise, how would it have been possible for her to spellbind so many men?" Sally rubbed salt into the wound. Howard still did not say a single word. After hearing Sally's words, his expression changed for the worse. Fiona noticed that Howard still had something going on in his mind. Subsequently, she suddenly thought of something. "Dad, I guess Simon is not that young anymore. Why don't you let him get married and have a family? Such a thing will prevent him from being seduced by women who have ill intentions. Douglas snorted. I'm also thinking of making him get married quickly. Do you guys know that not a single lady has appeared beside him in the past few years? Fiona thought for a moment before she said, Dad, why not leave this matter to me? I'll be sure to look for a wife that's from a family comparable to us for Simon. You. Douglas eyed Fiona suspiciously. Fiona put on a confident expression. Don't people always say that the elder sister-in-law is just like a mother? Since Mom is no longer around, I, his sister-in-law, shall take responsibility for his marriage. Douglas fell silent for a moment before he finally said, It would be for the best. I guess it's time for someone to be there to constrain him. Chapter 17. Sharon got up early in the morning and prepared breakfast. Then after having it with her son and Riley, the three of them headed downstairs. As usual, Riley was ready to drive and send Sebastian off to the kindergarten before sending Sharon to her company and driving herself to work. The three of them had already walked out of the condominium when Riley was all set to begin driving. At that time, the door of a black car that was parked nearby suddenly opened. The vehicle seemed rather luxurious, and Fiona was seen getting down from the car. Sharon, said Fiona coldly. Sharon raised her head when she heard her name. She was surprised at Fiona's appearance at the condominium when it was still so early in the day. Judging by Fiona's aggressive attitude, it seemed like something bad was bound to take place. Sharon was not willing to let Fiona know about her son's existence, and thus had Riley bring her son to the car as she waited for Fiona. She told Riley she would be with them in a moment. Riley felt worried. You don't have to entertain her. Don't worry. She has come all the way here. So if I dodge her this time, she might visit the place where I work next. Sharon patted Riley's shoulder gently, assuring her. Riley thought that she had a point and let out a sigh. Then you should be cautious. Give me a call if things don't go right. All right, Sharon said to Riley. Subsequently, she patted her son's head. Go to the car with your godmother and wait for me. Sebastian furrowed his little brows. You better be fast, Mommy. He could sense that the lady coming for his mother was not a good person. All right, off you go. Sharon only walked toward Fiona after seeing that Riley had led the little kid away. Are you looking for me for something, Aunt? Sharon stood before Fiona. However, she had not expected Fiona to immediately slap her upon hearing her words. All of a sudden, Sharon felt as if her face was burning because of the pain. Furthermore, her ears were ringing due to the slap. The next moment, Fiona blurted out rude and angry comments as she said, Sharon, how can you be so shameless? Who gave you the courage to come back here? You better leave Northern City this instant. Otherwise, be prepared to bear the consequences. Sharon was unable to snap out of the daze she had been placed in by the slap she had received earlier. Nevertheless, she suddenly heard the sound of footsteps running toward her from behind. They were followed by a little figure that appeared in front of her. Sebastian shoved Fiona away and roared, Evil woman! How dare you slap my mommy? He stretched out his arms and protected his mother by placing himself in front. Although his physique was small, he had the vibe of a gentleman. Riley came over as well and praised Sebastian. Then, she glared at Fiona and roared, Old lady! How dare you beat others under broad daylight? Do you believe me if I say I'll report you to the cops and have them lock you up in prison? Fiona was unable to catch notice of something as she struggled to regain her balance after being forcefully pushed away by Sebastian. In the end, Fiona stumbled backward and knocked against the body of her car. It has to be said that only with the support of the car did she manage to support and prevent herself from falling on the ground embarrassingly. After steadying herself, she stared at the three as if apoplectic with rage. However, the moment she saw the little boy, she was stunned. This boy, why does he look so familiar? Why do I think that this boy looks a bit like Howard when he was young? He shouted at Sharon and called her mommy. Does it mean that he's Sharon's son? The rage within Fiona changed into curiosity as she was flabbergasted. This is your son? She looked surprised as she stared at Sharon and asked. Sharon had never intended to let Fiona catch a glimpse of the little kid, because she did not want to invite room for more trouble. Nevertheless, she had not expected things to spiral out of her control. Evil woman, you hit my mommy. I'm going to call the cops to catch you. Sebastian would never allow someone to bully his mother. Sharon pulled Sebastian behind her. She didn't want to let Fiona stare at him. She said coldly, "Fiona, if you're only here today to tell me to get lost, I suggest that you save your breath. I have the freedom to decide whether I stay or leave. You have no right to interfere." Initially, Fiona had wanted to chase Sharon away. However, her thoughts became cloudy the moment she caught sight of Sebastian. She thought to herself, "This boy can't be Howard's, right? If he belongs to the Zachary family, I won't let him follow Sharon. I have to investigate the boy's identity. All right, you may stay, but if you intend to destroy Howard's marriage, I'll never forgive you." After speaking, Fiona fell silent for a while before she suddenly thought of something. Consequently, she added, "Also, don't think of getting too near Simon. He's not the type of wicked lady like you would be able to get close to. Hey, old lady, hurry up and get lost. We don't welcome you here." Riley could no longer tolerate it and thus roared. Fiona glanced at her coldly and did not say another word. In the end, she looked at Sebastian, re-entered the car, and left the scene. Sharon frowned without realizing it. She could not help but sense that after Fiona caught sight of her son, the latter began acting weird. Otherwise, how could she have so easily let her off the hook? "Mommy, your face is swollen. It must hurt, right?" Sebastian looked at her heartbroken. Sharon snapped out of it. "It's nothing. It's not that painful." Then she praised, "I didn't expect my son to already be a little hero who can protect me. Mommy, from now onward, if anyone bullies you, just let me know. I'll be sure to defend you." Sharon wanted to laugh when she saw his expression. Nevertheless, she felt warmth beginning to course through her. "All right, I'll look forward to you protecting me from now on. Could you guys have this disgusting conversation during your bedtime?" Riley turned a blind eye. The three of them looked at each other and chuckled. Then, Sharon headed to a pharmacy shop by the roadside to buy some ointment. Subsequently, she put on some and headed to the company. In the end, she still felt insecure because of Fiona's sudden appearance. Furthermore, Fiona's expression when she saw her son made her unable to remain calm. Chapter 18. The unexpected incident that had taken place that morning nearly caused Sharon to be late for work. The moment she reached the company, she was notified that the president had summoned her. Simon had placed her in charge of the company's Mountain Linguistic City project. Perhaps he wanted to inquire about her work progress. Sharon arrived at the president's office. Simon was sitting on a leather swivel chair, handling documents busily. He was wearing a hand-sewn suit that was custom-tailored to fit. It made him look extremely good-looking. "President Zachary." Sharon stepped to the front of the office desk. Simon raised his head to look at her and squinted his black eyes. "What's wrong with your face?" Sharon was slightly dumbfounded. She had already applied some ointment, yet the swelling was so obvious. She did not wish to let him know that Fiona had come for her earlier. He had said that he did not wish to be caught in her grudge between herself and Howard. Thus, she had no choice but to tell a lie. "I accidentally tripped on my way out today." Simon's eyes darkened slightly. He had no intention of exposing her since she had told such a terrible lie. Whether or not she wanted to tell him the truth was up to her to choose. "How are your preparations for the Mountain Linguistic City project?" Simon asked. "I've gone through the project's introduction, and I'm planning to go over to the site today to have a look at it," said Sharon. "It's just the right time then, because I'm about to head over there too." "You'll come with me," he said before putting down the pen in his hand. It was the pen he used to sign documents. Simon got up and was about to make a move. On the other hand, Sharon was a bit surprised but quickly regained her composure. She replied immediately, "All right." Then, she tagged along with Simon and left the company as they made their way to the project's site concerning the Mountain Linguistic City. The business site was composed of a hotel, entertainment complex, and shopping complex. Sharon was in charge of the interior design of the hotel. After the two of them arrived, the site manager welcomed them. The manager reported to Simon on the project's progress. Meanwhile, Sharon tagged along beside them and made notes as she observed the environment and listened to the report. While the manager was still explaining halfway, a worker interrupted them. The worker wished to seek advice to solve a problem. Simon permitted the manager to head over to settle the issue. Not long after, Sharon and Simon came to the shopping complex that had just been finished. There were workers in the main hall of the first floor, putting up chandeliers. Everyone was so busy working that no one noticed their presence. All of a sudden, Simon's phone rang. Consequently, he asked Sharon to wait for him, as he made his way to a corner to answer the call. Simon stood in a corridor, not far away from Sharon, as he spoke to another person on the phone. On the other hand, Sharon had now grasped the basic idea of the place, and her mind had begun thinking of her design proposal. Coincidentally, she spotted a chandelier above Simon's head that had been just installed. It was shaking vigorously while being blown by the wind. It is too dangerous. Subconsciously, Sharon wanted to tell Simon to leave that spot. However, before she could speak up, the chandelier fell. Careful, she rushed over and pushed Simon away reflexively. Bang! Arg! Sharon was in pain as she shrieked. Sharon! Simon grabbed hold of her. He saw that her foot was injured, and blood was flowing down it. The chandelier had smashed against it when it fell. Seeing how she had gotten injured for his sake, he felt a pinch in his heart. Furthermore, he suddenly felt a chill crawl up his body. Who asked you to come over? He frowned and lectured in a deep voice. Sharon looked at him innocently. If I hadn't come over, the chandelier would have smashed you right on your head. She thought that Simon was being too fierce considering how she had rescued him. Do you think I'm that stupid? The man said in displeasure. At that moment, the manager arrived. He had just settled the earlier matter. On the other hand, people had gathered at the scene after hearing the commotion. Simon looked at the manager with a stony expression. Who was in charge of installing the lighting right here? The manager was so terrified by Simon's cold expression that he began to stutter. I'll immediately check on it. Fire that person. Additionally, fire whoever is in charge of this area. He had no need for workers who did not do their work seriously. Everyone who heard this took in a deep cold breath. Sharon frowned. Isn't he being too stern? Yes, President Zachary, said the manager with his head lowered. His forehead was drenched in a cold sweat. Simon did not say anything more. He merely carried Sharon away as he left the scene with big strides. His face was dark. Sharon was sent to the nearest hospital by Simon. A doctor tended to her injury there. Fortunately, it was a minor injury. Nevertheless, the wound could have ended up infected if no precautions had been taken. At that moment, Sharon sat on the hospital bed. Her injured limb was wrapped with white gauze, and the sight of it was hilarious. The doctor and nurse left. Consequently, Simon and she were the only ones in the ward. The man's eyes were swirling with mixed feelings as he glanced at her. He had not expected her to ignore all outcomes and rush to save him. Wasn't she afraid of being smashed? If it weren't her foot that was smashed but her head. Simon felt his heart sink. He did not dare to continue thinking about it. Sharon began to experience goosebumps as Simon kept looking at her. She licked her slightly dry lips. Well, the injury is not that serious, you don't have to. Next time, don't do such a foolish thing again. He cut her short coldly, before she could finish speaking. She was dumbfounded as she looked at him. She had thought he felt sorry for her injury. And thus, she wanted to comfort him to not keep it in his heart. Needless to say, she had not expected him to comment on her actions as foolish. What an ungrateful guy. I'll keep that in mind. Next time, I won't make decisions based on my opinions alone. Although she had saved him, he did not express his gratitude. Simon noticed her upset expression. However, just when he was about to say something, her phone rang. Sharon answered the call, and suddenly became anxious. Simon did not know what she had heard as the latter said. What? All right, I'll head over there now. She disconnected the call, and immediately wanted to get down from the bed when Simon halted her. Where are you going? She said anxiously. Something happened to my son at school. I need to go there. Chapter 19. Sharon could not be bothered by the injury on her foot, as she needed to rush over to her son's school. Her son's class teacher had just called and notified her that her son was engaged in a fight with another child at school. Seeing how anxious she was, along with how hard it was for her to move around, Simon offered Sharon a ride to the school. Even though the injury on her foot was not that serious, she was still unable to walk by herself. Upon arriving at the school, she was hesitant about how she should get down from the car. Simon strode to the side of the car door, without saying a word before offering his hand. Come down, I'll support you as you walk inside. Sharon looked at Simon's long and large hand that had been placed in front of her. Deep within her, she was worried about her son. Thus, she did not think twice before placing her hand in Simon's palm. Simon supported her to the teacher's office. The moment they entered the door, she saw her son standing with another boy. The little kid's shirt was soiled and even torn apart. There were some bruises around the corner of his mouth while his arm was stained with blood. It seemed like he had brawled with the kid beside him. Sharon felt her heart sink. Ignoring the pain she felt in her leg, she dragged her feet and waddled over. Sebastian. This kid. It has only been a few days since he started attending school. How could he get into a fight with another kid? When Sebastian, who had looked all tough earlier, saw his mother, his eyes began to redden. Nevertheless, he tightened his lips and did not make a sound. Sharon looked at the student beside him, whose face was bruised and swollen. There was a bloodstain on his face, and his shirt was also torn apart. It looked like the kid was suffering a greater injury compared to Sebastian. You must be Sebastian's mother, Sharon, right? Said the teacher, who was sitting beside the office desk. Sharon quickly replied, Yes, that's me. Miss Swift, what happened exactly? How did they end up like this after fighting? Miss Swift glanced at her, and then at the man who was supporting Sharon. She felt that the latter was giving off an imposing vibe. Nevertheless, Miss Swift recovered and said, I think it would be best for him to tell you himself. Subsequently, Sharon looked at the little kid and asked, Tell me, why did you fight with him? He deserved to be beaten. Sebastian felt a little sorry, but he felt even angrier. He proceeded to put on a look that stated he was innocent. Sharon frowned. Spit it out properly. He said disgusting things. He scolded me. Sharon's brows furrowed deeper. She had never seen her son behave like this before. How did he scold you? Sebastian's eyes became redder. It was obvious that his eyes were slowly being flooded with tears. However, he clenched his little fist and stubbornly tried to prevent his tears from falling. He said that I'm a bastard kid with no father. You are a bastard kid with no father. Everyone has a father except you. The student, who had been silent all this while, suddenly shouted. He was exasperated as well. I dare you to say it again. Sebastian clenched his little fist in anger. He was about to punch him again. The other kid did not show any sign of weakness. Sharon noticed that the two kids were about to brawl again, and thus quickly pulled them apart. She finally came to an understanding of the reason behind the incident. She took hold of her son and put him behind her as she faced the student. Little kid, I'm Sebastian's mother. What's your name? The latter glanced at her, raised his chin and snorted. Levi Charles. Levi, what you pointed out earlier is correct. Everyone has a father, and Sebastian has one as well. I admit that Sebastian shouldn't have laid a finger on you, seeing that you're his classmate. However, please refrain yourself from saying things that will hurt others. She had not expected her son to be teased by other students for not having a father. She felt as equally sad as her son. Levi did not spare her any mercy, thinking that he was right. He has a father? Then where is his father? Ask his father to show up. It isn't just me. Everyone knows that he doesn't have a father. Sebastian's little face turned bright pink. It was because he was infuriated and was about to throw a punch. Nevertheless, he was halted by Sharon. She was troubled. At the moment, she had no idea where to find a father for her son. I am his father. A deep male voice was suddenly heard. Sharon was dumbfounded to hear it. She turned around robotically and looked at Simon, who was standing behind her. What did he say? Sebastian also found it hard to take in as he stared at Simon. Simon looked at their astonished gazes and walked over. He stood before Levi, who was so terrified that his eyes were now wide open. I am Sebastian's father. Even though he beat you, I still think you owe him an apology. Simon was very tall. Thus, with him standing before Levi, it caused the latter to be petrified. At that moment, Sharon had still not snapped out of it. However, Sebastian was quick to get the hint, as he went over and grabbed Simon's hand. He said with confidence, My father is right here. My father will be sure to teach you a lesson if you dare say I have no father again. Levi was petrified by the vibe Simon was giving off. He did not believe that Simon was Sebastian's father, but they both looked very alike. Thus, he dared not make a single sound. The head incident occurred out of the blue. Even after Sharon had snapped out of it, she did not know how she should put her thoughts into words. She had never expected Simon to tell a lie for the sake of helping her son. At that moment, Miss Swift came over. "Hey, so you're Sebastian's father? No wonder the moment you entered, I felt that you two, who are father and son, looked really alike. It's just like something from a mold." Simon and Sebastian could not help but look at each other after hearing it. Their eyes glittered with curiosity. Are we really that alike? Chapter 20. The atmosphere of the office room, especially the atmosphere between Sebastian and Simon, became extremely quiet because of the comment made by Miss Swift. Sharon's heart skipped a beat when she heard Miss Swift's comment. In truth, just by the sight of Simon, she felt that he looked like her son. She had once been suspicious about it, but dared not think in such a manner. She chuckled, easing the extraordinarily quiet atmosphere at that moment. "Miss Swift, I think there was a misunderstanding between the students, and it led to them fighting. Let's not make a fuss over this incident." Miss Swift was used to seeing kids fight. "I merely informed you guys as parents to come over so you can have a better understanding of the incident. Of course, it's for the better if things can be settled peacefully." Miss Swift looked at Levi with a stern look. "You've seen Sebastian's father make an appearance. So from now on, you better not spout comments saying that he doesn't have a father, got it?" Levi was still slightly unsatisfied. Nevertheless, he lowered his head and said in a soft voice, "Got it. Then the both of you should apologize to each other. From now onward, you guys will be good classmates to each other," said Miss Swift. They had not expected Sebastian to blurt out immediately, "I'll never forgive him for what he said, and I won't accept his apology. However, since I've already beaten him up, I guess we can call it a tie." In other words, he would not accept the apology and would not apologize as well. Levi was not willing to give in either. "You think having a father makes you great? Who doesn't have a father?" Humph. After saying that, he spun his head around. Sebastian snorted heavily in response to Levi and turned his head away as well. Both of them were not willing to look at each other. The adults, who were watching from the side, thought that the two little kids were simply too dramatic. They could not help but shake their heads and chuckle. Subsequently, Sharon fetched her son home. Simon gave the both of them a ride back to their place. There, Sharon asked Simon whether or not he would like to have a cup of water out of courtesy. However, she had not expected him to really get down from the car and follow them upstairs. Her foot was injured, and it was not convenient for her to move around. Thus, Simon and the little kid supported her from both sides. This caused a weird feeling to arise within her. Back in their house, the area which was usually not considered cramped had suddenly become much tinier because of the appearance of Simon, who was a tall man. Sharon felt rather embarrassed to invite Simon into their little house. "Am I being impolite to the president? President Zachary, please bear with us and have a seat." Sharon invited him to sit on the sofa. She then turned around and said to her son, "Go pour Uncle a glass of water." Before this, Sebastian did not have a good impression of Simon. However, seeing how Simon had offered him his help today, he might as well pour him a glass of water. "Mommy, you have a seat. I'll go pour you a glass of water." He was still being very caring toward his mother. Sharon finally let out a sigh of relief when she saw Simon sit down without feeling disgusted. Not long after, the little kid came back with 2 glasses of water. He placed a glass of water before Simon and said, "Uncle, even though you were haughty previously, you helped me out today. So thank you. I hope we can be friends from now on." After saying that, he put on an act and even tapped Simon on the shoulder, as if he was a little adult. Sharon nearly spat out a mouthful of water when she heard her son's words. Simon looked at the little kid and found it interesting. He curled his thin lips. "So it means I must fulfill some criteria to be your friend?" "Of course, not everyone has the right to be my friend. Uncle, Donnie, you feel honored about it." The little kid raised his chin and put on a proud look. The curves around the corners of his mouth grew wider, and the interesting expression in his eyes began to sparkle even more intensely. "Actually, I'm very honored." He could not help but think to himself, how did Sharon manage to teach her son to be such an interesting kid? Sharon felt very anxious deep within her, and thus quickly yanked her son to her side. Let me see whether there are any other injuries on your body. No. Mommy, don't worry about me. Levi is not even my opponent. Then how did you get yourself injured right here? Your shirt is torn apart too. Sharon pointed at the corner of his mouth unhappily. The little kid let out a moan in pain and immediately shoved her hand away. I just accidentally ended up receiving a punch from him. Next time, never fight with your classmates. Violence can't solve problems. Do you remember that? Sharon said softly, feeling heartbroken. That depends on the matter. Some things depend on violence to be solved. Sharon felt helpless as she sighed. Don't you dare talk back to me. Go take a bath and change your clothes. Roger, honorable mother. The little kid obediently headed to the bathroom to bathe. Consequently, only Sharon and Simon were left in the hall. She turned around and met Simon's deep, black eyes only to realize he was looking at her with a sharp gaze. Well, thanks for everything today. No worries. Didn't you also get injured because of me? He said faintly. Sharon lowered her eyes as she thought to herself. He has sat down and finished his water. So isn't it time for him to leave? It was not that she wanted to chase her guest away, but not knowing the reason behind it, she felt that Simon's presence made her uncomfortable. Where's the kid's father? Simon asked suddenly. Sharon was dumbfounded. She clenched her fist that had been subconsciously placed on the sofa. She had no idea how she should answer that question. I remember seeing on your resume that you stated you're not married. Does it mean that you got pregnant before you got married? Simon squinted his eyes and paid full attention to her. Sharon took in a deep breath before saying, Yes, I got pregnant before I got married. The kid doesn't have a father. Simon continued staring at her. His words, which were then spoken in a non-hurried manner, had an immensely serious tone to them. How did the child come to be without a father? He paused for a moment, and his gaze became even sharper as he stared at her. Is it not Howard? Sharon looked at him after hearing the comment. She furrowed her gorgeous brows and immediately denied it. Of course not. Their four eyes met, and she could see the curiosity gleaming in his eyes. He actually thought that Sebastian is Howard's son,